Well, thank you. A couple weeks ago, we started this. We're probably not going to be able to make it all the way through, but we're in John chapter 8. I will go ahead and reread this passage very quickly. They went each to his own house. Verse 1 says, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple. All the people came to him and sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, placing her in the midst. They said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commands us to stone such woman. So, what do you say?' This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down, he wrote with his finger in the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and he said to them, 'Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her.' And once more he bent down and he wrote on the ground. But when they had heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and he said to her, 'Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?' She said, 'No one, Lord.' Jesus said, 'Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more.'" We've been talking about this topic of grace and truth, and the fact that you have to have both of them. We can use both of them in pretty dangerous ways. There are people in this world who are all about just simply truth, and ends up being that truth can absolutely be weaponized. Truth is good, but when it's thrown at somebody and there's no grace affiliated whatsoever, it can be a weapon. We do use it that way. But at the same time, the idea of grace can be used the same way. And I just find it so interesting. We had talked about this, so just a little bit of a recap. This woman is caught in adultery. She comes, she's brought before Jesus, and they're looking, the Pharisees are looking to kind of step into the role of the jury, the judge, and the executioner. And so they bring her before Jesus, but at the very same time, they're not bringing her before Jesus because of her. They're trying to test him. At this point, he's accumulated some following, and he was teaching them things that were different than what they had always been taught, and they didn't like the way he went about his life, and they didn't like how he went about his teaching, and people were looking to him more than they were looking to them, and so they were trying to find something to be able to put charges against him. As we know now, obviously, sometime later, false charges are brought before him. But they're looking for something, and Jesus he doesn't give in to them. And, these men who brought her before Jesus, they were absolutely right. According to the law, this was acceptable. It wasn't the first time someone may have been caught in adultery. Stonings were happening. This was all legitimate. And so I think that, when Jesus kind of does this, he stoops down and he begins to write in the sand. We're not told what that is, but we are told what he says next. And he says, "You without sin, throw the first stone." Go ahead. And I think we pay so much attention to that we forget what he didn't say. He didn't say, "It's no big deal." He didn't say, he wasn't so just, he wasn't just full of grace that said it's okay, everybody makes mistakes, this happens, she wasn't the only one, he didn't say, "Let's give her a break, it's not really her fault, you don't know her story like I know her story, I know what she was like growing up, I know the situation she was in." He doesn't say that. He also doesn't say it's okay. We all make mistakes. She's young. She has to learn. right? These things were not things that he had said, but at the very same time, he also doesn't look at them and say, you're absolutely right. You're so right that I'll grab the stone. I'll be the first one. You see how both of them could be weaponized? Grace can be weaponized by just continual compromise of the truth. But at the same time, truth can be weaponized of this is just it. There's nothing else that you can do. You made this one mistake. Life is over. And there are people who do treat others in that way. You were caught in something, and the wages of sin is death. So here we go. It is true. But Jesus, he doesn't respond in these ways. What he says to them is, if there's someone in this religious crowd who hasn't committed a sin, I commend you for that. You be the first one. You start it. And all of a sudden, they start leaving one by one. It's almost like Jesus was saying to them, okay, if these are the rules you want to play by, then we'll play that game. That's okay. But if you're going to cast this stone against her, you might as well, as soon as you release that stone, you might as well go get in line beside her. Because if we're only going to play this way, then you're next. The very same truth that brought her from them to Jesus is the same truth that they quickly turned around and ran from. I just think it's so interesting. And it happens all the time today. But we really can use truth as a weapon to destroy other people. We can use truth, in this case, they could use truth to destroy her. But when they're done with her, they're next. Because everyone's going to get what they deserve. And, I think we have to look at it in the regards of when I'm confronted with the truth, that although they may be wrong, the truth is I'm guilty too of something. And I want to be able to experience grace. So I put down my stone and I walk away. I think the truth that they were using to condemn this person ultimately would turn around and condemn them. So they decided, that's okay. So look at verses 10 and 11 again here. Jesus stood up and he said to her, "Where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." I think this is important. This is a part of the account that often gets left out. Jesus literally tells her, "I don't condemn you either." The very person in the crowd who was qualified to condemn her didn't. And he could have. He could have picked up the stone. Because he was the only one in the group who had the authority to pick up the stone. But he chooses to give her another opportunity. He could have done this, but he didn't. And that's what grace is all about. And I think that's what Jesus is saying. I think he's saying, I could condemn you, but instead I'm going to give you something a whole lot better. I'm going to give you what you need, not what you deserve. But these last few verses in this passage, in the English Standard, it's the last 8 words. He has shown her grace. These last 8 words is where the truth comes in as well. Because if you just leave it there, which a lot of the world does, this is one of those passages that a lot of the world will say, well, God is just grace. Because they leave out this last part. In the English Standard Version, it says, "Go, and from now on, sin no more." That's the truth. That's what Jesus is trying to bring her to. Go and sin no more. In other words, from now on, I'm going to show you grace right now, but from now on, you can't continue to live this way. You can't continue to run around. You can't continue to be in adultery. You can't continue this lifestyle that you're so a part of because you're living a life apart from what God says is best for you. And when we sin, that's what we do as well. We live a life that God says is not good for us. And so Jesus is telling her, I could condemn you, but I'm not going to because I want something that's better for you. But you've got to stop the life that you're living. You've got to stop. You can't continue to live life your own way because living life your own way is not the best way that I have for you. So he offers her grace. But he wraps it up in truth. And you see, that's what we're trying to get at. We have another, I don't know, definitely another 20 minutes probably. So we're not going to get this done tonight. But what I want you to know is that is where love sits, in that tension between grace and truth. If we're just so full of truth and no grace, we aren't showing people love. But the same is true the other way. If we're so full of grace and we show no truth, that's not love either. And there are both sides to this story. But we need to learn, and I need to learn what it's like to live in the middle of those two things. Because let's face it, we're all humans. Somebody does something wrong to me, what's the first thing we want? Justice, right? Justice, that's what we want. Well, sometimes I think that we get so focused on justice that we forget we've probably been in that boat too. We've probably done something to somebody else that we shouldn't have done. We've probably said something we shouldn't have said. We probably acted the way we shouldn't have acted. And when we do it, we want grace. And Jesus is showing us a perfect picture here of what it's like to live in the middle of that. Because that's what Jesus is. He offers grace, but man, those last 8 words, go and from now on, sin no more. That's an expectation that he has. And here's the thing. We don't know if there was ever another encounter that Jesus had with this woman. But I do bet if they had another encounter where she was caught in the act of adultery, Jesus' answer is probably a little bit different. But he knew in this moment that he needed to show grace, but he needed to give truth. So one of the questions that I'm asking, over the next couple of weeks is, are we accepting God's grace in our life? And are we accepting God's truth in our life? Because we need both of them. Why don't you stand with me? We will close.